What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Excited today to be talking about how falling water can affect bass. And there's been a lot of rain this year on a lot of reservoirs in my area, and the lakes have been falling, 6 inches to a foot a day, and that can really affect how the fish position, where they're going to set up, how they're going to feed. A lot of different factors. And so I've been dealing with these conditions a lot over the last couple weeks. So I want to break those down for you guys today using some sonar images, Navionics maps, talk about some places where I actually caught fish in these conditions, and talk about the places where I didn't catch them as well, because that's probably just as important so you guys don't repeat the same mistakes I did. And so if you're watching this back on YouTube after I posted the video, then skip ahead to about the 10-minute mark. I'm going to do some channel updates and a few things like that and talk to people in the chat. And then about the 10-minute mark, I'll jump into the content. I'll be talking for about 40 minutes straight, and I'll do some Q&A at the end. And so for guys who are in the stream, what is up? Let's see what we got here. We got Camilo, we got Roger, we got Jay Carter, we got Kid Iraq as always, Ken, Steve, JT, better late than never. Glad I didn't lock the door on you, JT. And then we got Mike, and so anyways, good to see everyone here as usual. Kind of got the skeleton crew, it seems like, today. Steve, how's it going, man? Got 19 people in. Hopefully more people will filter in as the stream continues. But good to see. Oh, got some more of the regulars in. We got Squid, we got Jim, Don, Timo. How's it going, guys? Awesome. So excited again to talk about some topics. I didn't actually update my schedule over on the right side. I just realized that. But we're not doing questions today. We're actually going to be just talking about some of my patterns that have worked over the last couple weeks and kind of do the seminar format we've been doing recently. And so before we jump into that, I want to do a couple of announcements for you guys about the channel, things like that, so that we can all be on the same page of how everything's going. And so a couple things that I wanted to call out. First, I'm actually going to be in Hot Springs this weekend at the Forest Wood Cup. It's going to be on Lake Hamilton, and I'll be there at the show on Saturday and Sunday. And so if you guys want to come hang out with me at the show, I'm going to be posting a meetup time and a place, and maybe we can meet after the show, during like lunch, things like that. And so I'll be having a meetup at the Forest Wood Cup, FLW Forest Wood Cup. I'll post on social media about it as well. But let me know in the comments, guys, if you guys are going to be if you guys are going to be there, and you'll be able to hang out with me. We can talk fishing, talk about how the cup's going, literally anything like that. And so if you're going to be in the Hot Springs area, Central Arkansas area, come down to the Forest Wood Cup down at the convention center there in Hot Springs, and it should be a pretty awesome event. Lots of cool fishing products to check out, all kinds of stuff. And so other than Forest Wood Cup this weekend, a couple other things that kind of want to give you an update on. One, with the podcast, I know some of you guys have been listening to the Fishing Moment podcast. I've had to kind of put that on hiatus for just a little bit because I'm trying to get a bunch of other stuff off the ground, and I kind of need to focus on making sure I get my videos out, bass camp, all kinds of stuff. And so we have a bunch of episodes filmed, me and Travis, for the podcast. We're both super busy trying to launch our new channels and our businesses, stuff like that. And so we're probably going to bring the podcast back in a little bit. But for right now, it's going to be on hiatus for just a little bit. But don't worry, it's something I want to do. I'm going to keep the podcast up, the two we have there, and we'll be making more as we can. And then another thing to kind of give an update on, just going to add something to the screen here real quick. Just give me a second. Just on my website, a couple things to call out. First, we have the Bass Camp. I know I mentioned this in a couple videos, and I wanted to just let you guys know that the Bass Camp still is open. We have some availability there. Basically, the Bass Camp is in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're going to have it on either Sheeran Harris Lake or B. Everett Jordan Lake in North Carolina, and it's going to be a 3-day offshore fishing clinic. And by the end of the camp, you should be able to figure out how to locate fish offshore, what to look for, how to interpret your graph images, how to pick the right baits, and actually how to take all that and apply it on the water. And so I know that I talk about a lot of these things in my videos all over the place, but a lot of times I don't bring it all together in once, just because that would take so much time. That's why we have a 3-day camp for it. And this is just the first of many of these camps. I'm going to try to hold 4 a year. I'm also going to try to hold one in Texas later this year, somewhere in November timeframe. I know a bunch of you guys have reached out to me about that. But for those of you who do want to sign up, right now I have 3 people signed up, 3 boats, actually 6 people. And so I'm looking for 3 more groups or 3 more boats to sign up. And the cap is 6, and so definitely sign up. There's a few people who are looking at signing up here in the next couple of days, so don't miss your opportunity to sign up for Fish the Moment Bass Camp. And basically, you get 3 nights, 2 days of instruction with on-the-water and in-classroom instruction, all for the low price of $500 per boat. So $250 per person for basically 2 full days of instruction on the water and 3 nights in the classroom. So pretty good deal, I feel like. Got a full itinerary here for those who are interested. And all you have to do to sign up is just go to my website, fishmoment.com, click the Bass Camp tab, and then sign up by clicking here. And then you'll find Fish the Moment Bass Camp. And you can see here the dates, September 6th, 7th, and 8th. And you just go through here. And so it's pretty straightforward. And then I also still have one more opening for a one-on-one lesson as well on September 14th, a Saturday, in North Carolina on either Falls Lake, Sheeran Harris, or Everett B. Jordan. And so if Bass Camp doesn't work for you, you can't do 3 days, I have that Saturday open for a one-on-one lesson while I'm there. So go check out that if you want to sign up. I already have 3 that were filled up that week, and so this is the last one that's left. And so if you're interested, definitely sign up. So other than that, just a couple things there. Another thing we're going to be kind of getting into is the merchandise. Again, I am about to order some hats right now with the old Fish the Moment logo, and I'm about to do a logo redesign as well, and we're going to get that up and running. We're going to get some shirts and other hats, all kinds of stuff. But I'm going to call this the OG Fish the Moment hat. And so we're going to get this in a trucker style hat, which is just going to be like the round bill with the mesh in the back, so you guys don't have to worry about wearing like a really thick black hat like this one. I like these hats, these flat bills. We're probably going to order some of these flat bill snapbacks as well in the future with the classic Fish the Moment logo, just like the hats I'm wearing here. If you guys want to be, the original fans, and I'm just going to do limited runs of these. I think I'm going to print 100 hats with the old logo and maybe another 100 with the flat bill in the future. But right now, get them while they're hot, because once I get my new logo, this logo is going to be gone, and only the my original fans are going to have access to this this Fish the Moment logo on the hat. And so if you want to represent the old Fish the Moment or the original Fish the Moment, then check it out. And the new Fish the Moment logo will be out. The content's not going to change. I'm going to still be here. I'm going to be still doing the same thing. We're not doing sponsors. We're not doing BS. We're not talking about you have to buy every single bait and color on Tackle Warehouse to catch fish. We just talk about areas, where to actually find them, how to actually catch them. No BS, full transparency. You guys know the deal. So anyways, got a bunch of people in the stream, but let's see here. Gonna go through a few more comments, and we're gonna jump straight into it. Let's see. We got Captain Mike. We got Tom. We got Schmidt Fishing. How's Table Rock been? Table Rock was okay today. I was up in the James River today on Table Rock. Actually, I'll pull up that map of that real quick. Just give me 1 second as I transition this over. I can kind of show you what I was doing. I actually have a lesson out there on Friday that we're going to be looking at. So let me transition this over here. I have 10 Killer Lake pulled up, but I'll pull up Table Rock. I was actually up in the James River today on Table Rock. It's been pretty good-ish. Shell Knob has been really good for spotted bass. This area, you catch some good spotted bass. It's been a little bit tougher just recently. I don't really know what caused it, but it's been kind of tough. I've heard that story from a lot of people. Kind of been tough here. I was way up here in the James by Cape Fair, catching really good fish on the square bill up shallow in kind of the areas up here. And I'll have a video on this coming up, guys, with all my areas shown and everything. So don't worry about that. I'll have me fishing and catching these fish, and it'll be way more detailed than I could do even this live stream. And then did catch some fish here kind of in front of the Ants Creek area off of channel swing points on a football jig. And so, again, I have a video coming out with that, so no worries there. Should be coming out like next week sometime. So, anyways, that is pretty much it for the me selling my products and my business stuff, which I know you guys probably are not here for. You're here for, you know, the fishing content. How did I lose 10 Killer Lake? Where did 10 Killer Lake go? I feel like I'm losing my mind. Oh, it's right here. It's so hard to see. It's so dirty. Anyways, there we go. Cool. So what I want to do, guys, is I want to jump into the main topic for this live stream, which is how current will affect bass and how changes in water level are going to affect how bass position. And so give me 1 second here, guys, while I turn off Google Earth. I'm going to transition this over, and I'm going to pull up actually something that you guys are going to think is pretty cool. And I'm actually going to show you on 10 Killer Lake, the lake level and how that affects the bass fishing. And so something that has been kind of really interesting over the last few weeks is kind of how the lakes have been falling and how the elevation has been on these lakes, because they're dropping the water out of a lot of these lakes in Oklahoma. A lot of lakes, actually, I need to put my screen back up. Sorry about that, guys. Pull this back up. Boom. 10 Killer. So we got the 10 Killer Lake in Oklahoma, and this is one of the lakes I was fishing. I also fished Lake Stockton, which are both lakes that have been anywhere from 15 to 30 feet high, like super high. The water's been in the trees and the parking lots. People have been catching fish out of old RVs, really new RVs that people have left. They just like didn't come pick them up, and so they get flooded out. And if you look at the lake level, this is all kind of, I don't know what this is. This is all kind of crazy. But anyways, what you can see is that the lake right now is still 9.4 feet above normal pool. I don't know if you can actually see that very well. Let me zoom it in a little bit just so you can kind of get a better, come on now. There we go. Maybe you can read that a little bit better. It's probably still a little bit fuzzy. There we go. So 9.4 feet above normal pool, and they're releasing 2,300 cubic feet per second, which is quite a bit. And so they're basically trying to drain the lake of water. And so what you'll see is that the lake over time in just a 24-hour period is dropping about a foot per day. And so that is a ton of water that's getting drained out of this lake. They're really ripping this thing down. And so what you find is when you have this lake level that's just getting constantly drawn down, what happens is that you're going to have a lot of current that runs through the lake. And a lot of people don't really understand how much of a factor current will actually play in bass fishing on these reservoirs. A lot of times you'll hear about current is a big deal on, let's say, a river system, Arkansas River, the Mississippi River, places like that where you'll have current moving in and out. Maybe on tidal fisheries where you have the tides coming in and out every day. Or maybe when you fish like the Tennessee River where you have a hydroelectric dam where they basically pull water at the dams on the weekends and it generates current. But the situation here on 10 Killer Lake is a little bit different. On a lot of those lakes, especially on like a river system, the water's going to be muddier, it's going to be shallower, you're going to have those fish pulling up into shallow water. Here on 10 Killer, if we take a look at the Navionics map for this lake, you'll notice that this lake is definitely not what you would call shallow. And so if you take a look at this lake, down here kind of by the dam, you'll have 115, 120 feet of water out here in the middle. And so very deep lake, very clear lake, 10 feet of water visibility. And a lot of times, you know, people say, okay, current's really good for bass fishing. It really gets those fish going. You can catch a bunch of fish in the heavy current situations. But what happens when you get really heavy current consistently, like let's say they're pulling the lake down 6 inches a day, trying to drain the water out when the lakes flood. What that does is it really starts pulling a lot of water through the lake from top to bottom. And so what will happen is that the water out here in 120 feet of water is going to be pulling through just as much as the water that's up here in 5-6 feet of water. And when all that water is moving, to get you get 6 inches off the lake when the lake is 100 feet deep is a ton of current that's pushing through this lake, like a crazy amount. And like on the Tennessee River, let's say Pickwick Lake or something like that, you'll have I'll come back over here in just a second. We'll pull up Pickwick. If we take a look at Pickwick, where we go? Where's Pickwick? I am losing my mind. Here we go, Pickwick. I feel like it's weird that I can just pull up any lake off Navionics. Someone made a comment on that one of my lessons. I can just go straight to it. But anyways, Um, Johnny Mo said, tell that young man to stop moving the cursor so much. Sorry, guys. I'm swinging the cursor around like crazy. Anyways, the lakes here basically are going to have a hydroelectric dam. And like a Pickwick Lake, the current's going to be pushed through this lake. It's going to be pulling out and dumping into the dam, dumping here, dumping into all these lakes. And a lot of times the current will be somewhat consistent through this river system, but it may not be that heavy. And at the same time, you may have peaks where the current gets really strong for like 2, 3, 4 hours. And a lot of times on a lake like, Pickwick Lake, that will actually get the fish excited. And they'll start feeding on top of ledges and high spots along these main river channels. And that's how a lot of guys catch fish on Pickwick Lake. And normally when you have the current, it'll push the fish on top of the ledges, on top of the points, the humps, and they'll feed really well. And that's when the current is irregular, where it may be, running at 20,000 cubic feet per second all day, then jump to 40,000. Or it'll be pulling, maybe like 600 cubic feet per second, then it jumps to 3,000 or 4,000 cubic feet per second for 2 or 3 hours. That's what's going to get the fish to kind of change. But a lot of times on lakes like a 10 killer, you're actually going to have the water basically pouring out of this lake all day long. So there's no change in current or release. They're releasing the same amount of water all day, every day. And that's going to have a few implications on these fish that a lot of people don't really understand. The first is that when that current is pulling through this lake, a lot of times what it's going to do is pull the fish out of any major creek out to the main lake. And basically what happens is that there's going to be water that's getting drained out of these creeks because it's too high. The water's up here in 20, 30 feet high. So the water's getting drained out of these creeks, out of these pockets. That's going to pull the bait fish to the mouths of these pockets out to the main lake. And so the majority of your fish are actually going to be found out here on the main lake, especially offshore. Now, there's obviously going to be some fish that are still hanging out in the bushes when the lake's 9 feet high. There's going to be fish that are up shallow in the bushes. But for my videos and for my lessons, I always talk about offshore fishing. And so I'm going to mainly make this whole seminar about offshore fishing and how the heavy current will affect that. The shallow fishing can actually be really good, especially when the water's up in the trees. Like if you're got the water up, let me sweep back over to Google Earth really quick. If we pull up over here and we have the waters up, like for example, I was back in this little area here and all of this was underwater. This whole thing, this right here was in like 20 feet of water, 30 feet of water. All of this was flooded. Like it was flooded up to like here. It's crazy, guys. A ridiculous amount of water in this lake. And so obviously when the lake is flooded that high, there's going to be a lot of largemouth that will just still be hanging out around these trees and all these trees, these bushes. There's tons of shallow cover that makes the fishing really good. But that falling water will pull a certain percentage of the bait and the fish back out to the main lake. The other thing that the high water does a lot of times when you have really, really high water for, let's say, 2 or 3 months, especially in the summertime, is that the shad are going to spawn really well. And so if I pull up an image from my, let's see here, pull up an image from my Sonar recording system here. Let me pull this up. This is from my Sonar recording software. What you'll see is that in some of these images, I'm just going to kind of go through here, you'll notice that there is a ton of bait here on 10 Killer. And these are recordings from my down imaging on 10 Killer Lake. And you'll notice in here, there is just literally just piles of bait in this lake. And it's pretty much everywhere. There's really not any place where you're not seeing just giant schools of bait fish pretty much all over the place. And so you can see it's literally everywhere. What happens is when these lakes are really high, the shad are going to spawn in this like May, June time. And when there's so much water in all the trees, the shad spawn is going to be really, really good. And so when you have such a strong shad spawn, you're going to have lots of bait in the lake. And so it gets to a point almost where there's so much bait in the lake that it's really not that big of a factor in whether the fish are going to be on a spot or not, because every spot has bait fish all over it. Let's see here. By the way, got 123 people on, so getting here. We're kind of the skeleton crew, trying to get some more people. I'm seeing that Clint just joined in. But let's see here what else people. We got Herbs in. Probably missed a few other guys. Dale, how's it going? But a bunch of people are joining in. We want merch. That's what Timo says. Okay, I'll get on the merch for sure. So, anyways, with this. With the shad spawn, you'll have lots of shad to get on the lake, and that's going to have shad up on the surface all over the graph here. You can just see it's everywhere. And so what happens is that because there's shad literally on almost every single point, like literally I would graphed here, guys. I've said the word literally, I think probably 10 times in that little statement, so I apologize for that. But I started pulling around the corner from the boat ramp here. I started right here on the boat ramp. I saw piles of shad right here. I came around the corner. There was a pile of shad here. There was a pile of shad down this entire bank all the way down here. There's piles of shad over here, back in this bay, back over here. There was all kinds of shad. Back over up this way by the Chicken Creek boat ramp, there was shad everywhere. Literally anywhere you went, there was shad. So it's like, well, how do I fish when there's shad all over the place? What do I do? Basically, a couple things you can do is kind of almost ignore the shad themselves. Don't use that as a primary indicator of whether you should stop and fish a spot. Instead, focus on seeing fish on your graph. So, for example, in this image here, you can see that there's some nice balls of bait fish on this little point. And oh, you're not seeing my point. You're seeing my other screen. Sorry about that. Let me see here. There we go. This is the image. So there's shad everywhere. So basically, you don't use the shad as an indicator. Instead, look for places where you can actually see fish on your down imaging. So in here, you can see that there is some nice shad here, some nice shad over here, and there's actually 4, 5, 6 dots on this area, which is good. You actually see the bass, and that's great. Here's the problem, though. Because that current is flowing so strongly on this lake, remember, they're pulling the lake down a foot per day, and they're pulling 100 feet of water through that dam, basically, to drop that lake down. They're pulling a ton of water to get that lake down, so the current's going to be really strong, especially on the bottom of the lake. What that's going to do is that's going to spread these fish out a ton. And that's one thing that happens a lot on Table Rock Lake. A lot of lakes that are big, deep, clear lakes, especially in the wintertime when you get lots of rain in the spring. And when you get this, basically these, the really strong current, what it does is it will spread the bait fish out. So you can see over here the bait fish are all kind of spread out. You have lots of small clumps of bait fish. Not a lot of big clumps of bait fish. They're all kind of these small little groups. And you notice also that these bass are very spread out on the screen. You have 1 or 2 over here, 1, 2, a couple small dots over here, some more over here, a couple over here. And this is like over probably a 40-yard stretch. And so there may be 20 bass on this image, but they're spread out over 40 feet, and they're chasing these all these individual balls of bait fish. And when you don't have these fish grouped up, they're really hard to get to bite. Because basically what happens is that this current's going to be ripping through this lake, spreading out these bait fish, spreading out the bass. They're going to be chasing random shad, and there's no competition between these bass. Basically, when there's no current, or very little current, these bass will group up a lot tighter in smaller groups. And so, for example, if we pull up a recording from Table Rock maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago where I had like my mega school of fish, this is a little mega group of fish where you can see these fish are all stacked together, super tight together, packed in on top of each other. These fish are really easy to catch. You can just drop anything down there basically and they're going to eat it. And this is when Table Rock was basically at a constant water level. They weren't dropping the lake. It wasn't rising or falling. It was pretty much just pretty stable. And you were finding these giant schools of fish. But I'm actually finding now that they've been drawing the lake down. The lake was like 5, 6 feet high. And as they're drawing the lake down, this group of fish pretty much scattered. And you'll just see them kind of randomly scattered off this point. And that's because that current was so strong when they dropped the lake like 5 feet in 2 weeks. And it spread these offshore fish out, made them hard to catch, and the points kind of look more like this one, where you have these bass and these baits spread apart. And so it just makes it really tough to get these fish to bite, because if you think about how fish are, or just people in general, if there's a guy, let's say walking around, he's saying like, hey, I'm going to give you a free hot dog, got one free hot dog for you guys at a baseball game. You walk by, you might think like, oh, free hot dog, that's maybe too good to be true, I'm not really sure. And the guy in the seat next to you is like, ooh, I might get that free hot dog. And the guy in the seat next to you there, he's like, hot dog right here, I want that hot dog, and you'll get it. And there's competition. That guy's like, ooh, I'm not going to let these other two guys next to me get that hot dog, I'm going to get it. The bass is the same way. When these fish are grouped up super tight, you bring a swim bait, for example, through these fish. This first fish is going to look at it and be like, ooh, what's that? Second fish is going to be like, ooh, I might eat that. The third fish is like, screw you guys, I'm going to eat that bait. He comes and grabs it and eats it. And then all these fish get fired up and start feeding like crazy. And so the more fish you have in the school, the tighter they're grouped up, the easier they are to catch. And so I actually had a terrible time trying to catch fish on Table Rock a 10 killer this day. I didn't actually end up catching any fish this day offshore. I caught a couple up shallow, but nothing offshore, which was really disheartening. And when I looked at the lake, they actually dropped the lake like 1.5 feet while I was there. So they were draining the lake. And that makes it super hard to catch these fish because you basically have to put the bait in front of their nose, make them believe it's a real shad, and basically hit them in the face to get them to eat. And I'm sure that I didn't fish that much. I think I graphed for like 5 hours and fished for like 1.5 hours. So if I had fished for 7 hours, I probably could have caught some fish. But, I wasn't able to just pull up, make 2 or 3 casts and get these fish to bite. When the fish are grouped or like spread out like this, you may have to make a lot of casts with a lot of different baits. Maybe drag a drop shot down there, fish a finesse bait, a small finesse swim bait, a spy bait, something that was just really slow that you barely swim over the top of these fish to get them to bite when they're so spread out. Because you have to basically, 1, hit them in the face, and 2, you have to imitate something that looks very natural in the water. And so if we keep going around these areas, you notice there are several more places where I kind of saw fish. So for example, again, here's another nice long stretch of bank where you'll see 1, 2, 3 fish, kind of a couple right there, then another 2 fish over here. There's 3 or 4 fish right there. There's, some bait and then a couple random fish. But you can see these fish are very spread out. The bait fish are not in big groups. They're just kind of in these random little clumps, and they're all over the place. And so you can see these fish are on the screen. They're down there, and I tried fishing for them with a big flutter spoon, a hair jig, swim baits, all kinds of stuff. And again, these fish are just so spread out, there was no competition factor, and these fish just weren't eating. And so something just keep in mind when you have the current on your lake that's going like crazy, and you see that happening, make sure that you pay attention to what the actual release from the dam is. If they're dropping that lake a foot at a time per day, maybe that's not the best day to be fishing offshore. And actually, Clint, who's in here in the chat, we did a fishing lesson on Lake Stockton and found these exact same situations. They were ripping down Lake Stockton. It was super high, and they're drawing it down really fast. And we actually could feel the boat getting pulled by the current on the main lake, and it was actually on some parts of the main lake hard to even use the trolling motor to move us forward. That's how bad it was. And what we found is that a lot of these fish that were up, offshore, you would see bait spread out like this. You would see some random fish spread out, but we never really found a big group of fish offshore. Just like here on 10 Killer, almost identical situation. And so you might be wondering, okay, well, how do I actually catch fish in this situation when we see those that current and stuff like that? And so my recommendation would be to, instead of trying to fish the really deep offshore areas, instead what I would try to do is find places that are really close to points and bluff walls. And basically a bluff wall is any place where you see this water is or the creek channel or wherever swings really close to the bank, and then it creates basically almost like these thick black lines. It's a very sharp wall. And so if I pull up Google Earth here just for a second, I can show you kind of what these areas look like. A bluff wall might be a place that looks like this, where you can see this rock is very chunky and it drops straight off, and you're in like 70, 80 feet of water right here, and there's chunk rock right there. Some other good bluffs that are around this area are like this wall right here, where you normally have some good chunk rock, plus you have these really steep banks where it drops from 10, 15 feet of water into like 80, 90 feet of water. And the reason these bluff walls are good is because, one, you're going to be able to find fish, or these fish are going to be able to kind of easily move up and down on these walls. So if you think about it, if we go back over to the avionics image, on a bluff like this, these fish are easily going to be able to move from 4 or 5 feet of water, maybe 10 feet of water where they want to feed, down to 100 feet of water very quickly, which is great in the summertime because these fish can relocate, whether it gets hot or whether it gets cloudy, things like that, they can reposition. Another reason is these bluff walls are pretty, the drop is pretty sharp. It's basically a flat drop. And so when that, or the very steep drop, not a flat drop, it's a very steep drop, the opposite of a flat drop. And what that means is when that lake is dropping like a foot a day, because that drop is so steep, all they have to do is just move down in the water column. They don't have to move out from the bank. There's no need for them to move out from the bank here. They basically just move like a foot to the right and they're a foot deeper because that drop is so steep. Where if they were on a bank like this, for example, and that water's falling out, they're going to have to move a pretty big distance to be able to get out of that area. And so these bluff walls are really good places for these fish to kind of just set up on, live on. Another thing is if we take a look at Google Earth again, remember I mentioned that there was a lot of flooded cover in the lake. And so if you think about like this area back over here I was showing, all of this area, like especially like back over here, all of these trees right here were flooded up to like here. So all these trees were just completely underwater. And that is not a good thing a lot of times because there's so much cover in the water that these fish can get in that it's hard to kind of pick apart this area. You have to flip so many different trees, so many places for the bass to hide that it's hard to really find these fish. But on a bluff wall, it's very easy for you to find fish because really they're only going to move 5-6 feet just out to deeper water, back up maybe 5-10 yards. Back out to the deep water, back up to the shallow water. So when the water's falling and the water's really high, a lot of times these bluff walls are just an easier place to find fish. Another thing about these bluff walls that are great is that if you look at this bluff wall here, there's all these jagged rocks. And these rocks basically are places where the fish can get in behind the rocks to get out of the strong current pushing through this lake. And so as that current's pushing through the lake, these fish are going to be able to pull up on these, like behind these rocks, but still in 15-20 feet of water, escape the strong current, ambush any bait fish and stuff that are coming over the top of these areas, and feed really well. And so when I was doing my lesson with Clint on Lake Stockton, we fished on Lake Stockton. This is like 10 killer, but we fished a ton offshore, like the first 6-7 hours a day. Caught like one fish on an outside bank line where an old bluff kind of swung up. It was a hidden bluff. Caught a nice 3-pounder. Then after that, we went and messed around offshore for a long time. It just wasn't the deal because, again, that current was so strong and it was really spreading out the bait fish. But we pulled up to a bluff wall near the end of the day and caught 4 fish, boom, 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 with a 3-pounder, some smallmouth, some good fish off one little stretch of bluff. And what happens a lot of times, these fish will group up near the ends of the bluffs over here, right where the it kind of turns into a creek or connects with a point, and they might be on like the first 30 yards, 40 yards of this bluff. Sometimes they're on the entire bluff. That's less common, but a lot of times these fish pull up on these bluffs just in the first 30 yards. And you basically just have to run a lot of bluff walls to find fish. And so I'll run like this little area here where the bluff kind of swings out and gets shallower. That's a good little area. There's a ton of bluff walls on lakes like 10 Killer or other lakes around the area. So, for example, like there's a nice steep bluff wall right here. I might fish this bluff wall right here, first 30 yards until you get to this point. And a couple things is you may have to fish 10 or 15 of these bluff ends or kind of bluffy points. And really all I'm doing when I'm fishing this, guys, is I'm literally just taking a 3/4 ounce football jig as my go-to bait. I'm firing that 3/4 ounce football jig up right on the bank, and then we're dragging it out to 15 to 30 feet of water. So you're putting your boat almost a full cast length away from the bank, fire that thing out there all the way to the bank. Some of the bites when Clint and I were out there, we were getting bit in like maybe 10, 15 feet of water, but then some of those fish were biting in 30. And so that's why I like a 3/4 ounce football jig, because I can work that bait up shallow and it still gets bit, but I can also get it down there in the 30, 40 foot pretty easily. And I'll just fish, these 30 yards on the front of, or right on the kind of close to these points, these bluffs. I'll run, fish this one, find another one, run one right here, find another one, run one right here, and just run a bunch of them until I find a little stretch, a 30-yard stretch to have fish stacked up. When you find them, just like we did on Stockton, you might catch 4, 5, 6 fish in a row off a good bluff. And a couple things you can kind of do to figure out if a bluff is going to be good. One, look for a bluff that has wind blowing up on it. And so, for example, if you have a nice south wind, fish at this bluff. South wind's going to be pushing up against this bluff. That will push the fish a little bit shallower. It sometimes creates a mud line on the bluff, which then these fish can kind of relate to that mud line, or it just gets the water stirred up, pushes the fish shallower in general. And as you get into the fall, these bluff walls are awesome places to catch fish, even when your lakes are at normal pool, especially if you get windy days. Caught some big ones on 10 killer, fishing these kind of bluff walls and in the points, just fishing a football jig down those banks when the wind blows on them. And then again, if you get, for example, get a really strong south or a strong north wind, maybe fish this bluffy point here with the south wind. If you get a strong east wind, fish this bluff. Kind of get the picture there. Just kind of fish the bluffs with the wind blowing up on them. And so that's one way you can catch fish on these lakes. Another way that you can catch fish that is pretty consistent if you can find the right area, though it's a little bit trickier to find, is if you go to, let me pull up Navionics. Let's see here. This is one of those things where it's like, I can find fish on these spots sometimes, but not all the time. And it's places like these channel swing points, where you have this channel right here, this creek channel, right in through here that swings up against a bank, creating a bluff, and it ends in kind of a little point out here. And what you're looking for on these points are places where you have rock piles. And what happens is that this current's going to be washing down this channel. This channel is going to funnel that current. It's going to slam into this bluff wall and then spin back out. And then up on top of these points up here, especially when it gets sunny, things like that, you can sometimes pick off a few fish if there's like rocks, a rock pile, something like that up on top of these points right next to this main channel. And that's how I was catching them actually today on Table Rock Lake, though there wasn't that much current flowing really, but it's still something that will work when the current's flowing. And basically what these fish will do is just get behind the rocks in this area. And so if we pull up my fish sonar stuff again, I can show you some these places from 10 killer. Let me see if I can get my side scan going here. Give me 1 second. Side scan. Okay, so for example, for some rock, here's a nice little area where you can see there's a really nice rocky spot that's up on top of this point. The rocks basically are right here. You can see it casts a really nice shadow on my side imaging. And so I'm going over the top of a point. There's this really nice rock edge. If we kind of scroll here to the map, where was this? This was way up the river. Let's see here. Let's find another spot that was further down. Oh, I ran way up the lake. I remember that. Let me come back down the lake, guys. I can show you. Here we go. Give me 1 second. I need to find a point that is not super. Here we go. This is what I'm talking about. So here's one of these points. So see how you have this really nice rock up on top of this point? This point right here is actually, let me pull up my Navionics. It's actually just this point down by the dam. So if you look at this point, exact same thing. Creek channel swings in right up against a flat point. Creek channel swings in, point right here. These fish will pull up on top of this point. And there's some rock up on top of this area. And if we go back over to my sonar imaging, you can see that there's some bait fish up there. There's actually a fish down there in the rocks. And I graphed this area right as I was coming back at the end of the day, and I was like, ooh, I should probably fish that, but I was already running late, so I had to call it a day. But you can see there's actually one fish right there. Ooh, that messed up that would not look good. Not the best looking image I've ever put on the screen, but it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little dot right there in the tip of that rock. You can see all that rock down there. It just looks really pretty. And so that's the type of stuff that I'm looking for on the tips of these points. These fish can hide behind these bigger rocks. You can see these rocks are casting really big shadows over here. They'll hide behind those rocks, and when that current's going. Just like on the bluff walls, it's places where they can move shallow up on top of this point to deep pretty quickly, and they can escape the current in those big rocks off the points. And so that's something that I've done a ton when I'm fishing on Table Rock Lake, and it'll work out here on 10 Killer and other lakes like that. You just kind of have to find that deal. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's just another pattern to try. And then if I'm not catching fish on the bluff walls, if I'm not catching fish on these kind of points that swing with the channel swinging on them, a lot of times then I'm just going to go fish the bank. A lot of times when the water's still high in the bushes and things like that, especially when it's still 9-10 foot high in the bushes, a lot of those bass are still going to be up in the trees, and there may not be that many fish that have pulled offshore yet. And so what you may need to do is, rather than trying to force the offshore bite, which I do more often than not just because of the nature of what I try to do with my business and fishing lessons offshore and stuff like that, but sometimes the best way to catch them is just to run to the bank, get into the flooded trees, and just start flipping spinner baiting, swim baiting, swim jigs, and just crack them over the head. So sometimes that's just the best course of action. Sometimes that offshore bite just isn't very good. And I'm going to be making some videos about that here in the near future of like when not to fish offshore, because there are times when it's good to just ignore the offshore bite completely and just go fish up shallow, because again, the offshore bite is just another type of bite. It's like, if it's the spawn and there's 5-pounders all over the bank on the beds, you're not going to go fish offshore. You're going to go to the bank and go catch 5-pounders off the beds. Well, there's times like that too when there's 5-pounders all over the offshore ledges, the offshore points, stuff like that. But there's also times when the offshore bite just isn't the right deal and you have to go fish up shallow. Sometimes there's times when the shallow bite and the offshore bite both suck and you can just kind of pick your poison. But and then for me, I like to do the offshore. But a lot of times, if you force the offshore bite too much, you may actually end up missing a really good shallow bite, and it can cost you some good fishing trips if you do that. So last thing I want to talk about, guys, I got about 8 minutes left before the Q&A. What I want to talk about is when this lake starts getting drawn down. So again, for those of you who haven't kind of missed the premise of the talk here, 10 Killer Lake was 30 feet high. Now it's 9 feet high. And so the water's getting just basically blown out of this lake. And let me pull this back up really quick so you guys can see the water release schedule. So let me pull this up 1 second. So here's the actual elevation. You see they're dropping it. Dropped a foot today in 24 hours. They're releasing 2,300 cubic feet per second. It's 9 feet above normal pool. This is 10 Killer Lake. It was 30 feet above normal pool like a month ago. So they dropped it 20 feet in a month, basically. And so they're dropping it like crazy to get this lake down back to normal pool. And so because of that, one thing is, like I talked about, it'll spread the fish out, it'll pull them out of the creeks, things like that. The other thing it will do is it will put a lot of debris in the water. And so if we look at our Google Earth here real quick, what you'll see is that a lot of these, up in the dirtier creeks and stuff like that, there's lots of shallow water, shallow laydowns and bushes and trees and stuff that fall over. And all that stuff is going to get caught up in with the water falling, and it's going to get pulled out in the middle of the lake. And you're going to get a lot of debris that's in the water. And I'm going to make a video about this as well, guys, too, because this is something that's really important. But basically, let me show you an image from Table Rock that I captured a little bit ago. What you'll find is that when these lakes get drawn down really bad, is that on the upper end of these lakes where the shallower, muddier water is, and like kind of the backs of the coves, backs of the creeks, even sometimes in the main lake, you're going to get a ton of debris that washes up in the water. And so if you look here, you can see we have some nice groups of bait fish. We have some fish over here that look okay on the screen. And then all of a sudden, you start seeing a lot of stuff start showing up on the screen. You're right in through here. And you start seeing a lot of stuff. Like, look at that. That is crazy. Either you might think that's a bunch of shad or there's a bunch of fish. You're like, ooh, that looks awesome. You might stop and you might start fishing it. And you're like, man, look at all this stuff on the screen. There's got to be fish there. Well, a lot of times what this is actually leaves, sticks, and debris that's being washed up in the water, and the transducer is picking these up, and it looks like clouds of bait fish or looks like fish on the graph, but these are literally just sticks and leaves. And so a lot of times what I'll find is that if I go through an area of the lake and I'm driving through back in the creek and I start seeing stuff like this everywhere, where there's just like, it looks like there's just bait fish all over the screen here, but there's no bait. This is all just junk that's floating in the water. And so what I'll do is I might run, maybe a mile or two back out towards the main lake. And you'll find that a lot of times when you run back towards the main lake, you'll see less bait, you'll see less stuff on your screen. It'll clear up the image, and you can see over here again now, there's a lot less stuff showing up on the screen. This is actually bait fish. This is actually some bait fish. And as you get further back into this area, you get a bunch of crap on your screen. And so sometimes it can be almost overwhelming to see all this, and sometimes I actually don't fish offshore when my graph is showing all of this debris on it, because basically what happens is that you can't pick out the fish and the bait from these clouds of, whatever it is, leaves, tree branches, stuff like that. And so it's hard to graph for them, and also there's all this junk in the water that's going to interfere with your bait. They're going to have trouble picking out your bait from all the other junk out there. And so in those situations, if you're seeing all this stuff on your lake, just go fish shallow. Just go down the bank, start flipping, doing stuff like that, up in the shallow bushes, areas like that, instead of trying to fish offshore, or run to an area of the lake where there's less debris in the water, where you're not seeing stuff floating on the surface. That's really a big indicator. Like if you see leaves on the surface everywhere and sticks and brush all over the place, just kind of floating in the middle of the lake, you'll know that a lot of times the stuff on your graph is not bait, it's actually debris. And that's perfectly normal. Just don't want to get caught up in trying to fish a bunch of areas that look fishy when they're actually leafy, brushy, not brushy, debris. I don't know how to say that. Maybe you guys can help me out in the comments. But anyways, but let's see here. Well, anyways, but yeah, so that's pretty much it, guys. I woke up at I didn't wake up that early. I woke up at 5:30 this morning, but then I went fishing, drove an hour and a half, fished all day, came back, immediately did the one-on-one video lesson, then immediately jumped on the live stream. So I talked for 2 hours straight. Well, after fishing for 8 hours in 97 degree heat. So it's been a long day. I'm also waking up tomorrow morning to wake up and fish on Lake 10 Killer again, actually. We're going to see. I'm going to try to get some footage out here. Maybe I can actually show you guys how to catch some fish in these weird conditions we talked about. But there's some questions here. Let's see here. Couple. I'm going to go through some of these questions real quick and then see what you guys have to say. First up, K-Rex says, that AOI dude, I don't know who that is, said recently the deep cranks are irrelevant now. Tell me he's lying, please. I dropped $200 on them after a one-on-one buying them. I don't know why you would say that they'd be irrelevant. I crush them on deep diving crankbaits all the time. I'm still catching them on deep diving crankbaits. I actually have a video coming out soon talking about how I've been catching a lot of big fish on deep diving crankbaits this summer, even though I haven't been throwing them that much. And so it's still working for me. A lot of times people just like to say stuff just to be controversial, or I don't know. One thing I'll say is if everyone stops throwing deep diving crankbaits, then I am happy, because I'll keep throwing them and I'll keep crushing them offshore, striking 6XDs, striking 10XDs, any kind of crankbaits. So crankbaits are great. A lot of guys like to fish swim baits now, flutter spoons, all these different baits, but a crankbait for me still works super well, especially when you get in the dirtier water lakes. But I don't really know what he's talking about. David Dudley, I guess. He said crankbaits are relevant. It's just one guy's opinion. I don't know. I mean, I still catch them on deep diving crankbaits a lot. A lot of people catch them on deep diving crankbaits. So, yeah, there's a lot of people who don't. There's other baits sometimes that are better on certain lakes, but that's just a hot take. That's not a I don't know. That's interesting. They still work for me. If you put your bait in the right area, you can catch them on deep diving crankbait. Put it that way. Let's see here. Artie says, I don't like to fish offshore because when I use anything heavier than 3/8 ounce, I can't seem to feel the bait on the bottom. I'm using 15-pound fluoro. What am I doing wrong? Artie, just throw a 3/4 ounce football jig. just get a 3/4 ounce football jig. That's the best way to feel the bottom. If you can't feel the bottom with a 3/4 ounce football jig and you're dragging that thing down there, just Strike King 3/4 ounce football jig. If you can't feel that bait down there, again, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. I just pull up Strike King because I used to be sponsored by Strike King. I use their baits all the time in the past, but I'm not sponsored by them anymore, so these are just the baits I use. But anyways, make sure you're using a good rod. That's one thing. If you're using a cheap rod, like a $50 fishing pole from Academy, you're not going to be able to feel that bait hardly at all. And you want to make sure you're using some decent fluorocarbon, but really any fluorocarbon will work. But if you have a 3/4 ounce football jig, probably the reason you're not feeling the bottom is because you're not on the bottom. That's probably why you're not feeling the bottom. So you also want to make sure you're around some sort of cover, whether it's rocks or brush or something like that. If you're just on flat sand, you're not going to feel anything because you're just going to be dragging through the sand and it won't feel like anything. But if you make sure your bait's on the bottom so that feed your line out, make sure your line stops and hits the bottom, drag that bait sideways instead of lifting the bait up. If you lift your rod tip up, you're pulling the bait off the bottom and you will never feel the bottom. You have to drag the bait with your rod vertically or horizontally to the water. Then basically you'll start feeling the bottom. And then also pick up a decent rod. I would recommend, I've been using the Smoke S3 rods. You guys have probably been seeing me use these a lot. Used to be sponsored by Quantum also. Again, not sponsored anymore, but I still like Quantum stuff. And I would recommend getting a 7.4 heavy action Quantum Smoke S3 rod. I was throwing that today on Table Rock, throwing that 3/4 ounce football head jig down in 25 feet of water through the rocks. I could feel all the rocks, no problem, and I was feeling the spotted and largemouth bass that were grabbing it, setting the hook, putting them in the boat. So 3/4 ounce football head jig. That's the ticket with this type of rod. A little bit nicer rod will help for sure. Let's see here. Do you trim the weed guard on the hack attack jigs or leave them stock? I like to trim the weed guard on the really thick, if you do the hack attack, I have a hack attack jig already queued up. With this jig, I will leave the weed guard, or I will trim the weed guard on this really heavy jig, because this weed guard is like extra thick on just a regular hack attack jig. But then on the hack attack heavy cover swim jig, this weed guard's a lot flimsier. You can actually see sometimes it even gets bent up out of the package, and so I will just leave that full. Those fish will eat that no problem, and you don't need to trim the weed guard on the swim jig. Let's see here. Let's see here. Is there a water temp threshold that will always push fish deep no matter the other conditions? No, not really. If the water's high and it's muddy, those fish will stay shallow all the time if it's like super high and rising. So you can't really say like one water temperature will always push fish deep. It just depends on the time of year. There's so many factors. I can't really get into it and just answer your question, but short answer is no. RSPS Gremlin says or asks, not sure if you've looked at Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. If so, any tips on that lake? Got a trip in late September. Fish brush piles. Brush piles in front of docks in 20 to 25 feet of water. That's all you got to do. Take that 3/4 ounce football jig I just showed, throw it in brush piles, graph in front of boat docks, fish brush piles. You'll catch them. Easy money. A few more questions here, and then I'm going to jump off. What color crankbait do you throw this time of year in muddy water and clear water? Basically, if I have less than 2 foot of visibility, or is that 6XD? Doesn't really matter. Both for the 6XD and for like a square bill, it doesn't really matter for both. I only throw like 3 color crankbaits, guys. I'm not picky with crankbait color, but in a deep diving crankbait or shallow diving, I'll just give my same suggestion. If you're fishing in the clear water, let's say it's I guess I fish 4 color crankbaits. I lied. I fish 4 colors. But if you have less than 2 feet of water visibility, go with either a chartreuse blackback or a chartreuse blueback. Doesn't really matter if it's a blueback or a blackback. Just a chartreuse crankbait, less than 2 foot of water visibility. If you have 2 to 4 foot of water visibility, throw a sexy shad or just like a white color. It doesn't really matter if it's sexy shad, but I like sexy shad. Sexy shad, summer sexy shad. turtle shad. These are all these crankbaits are identical to me. None of these are any different. They're all the same. It's just a white crankbait. I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Some people will debate that. I have not found it to make a difference when I've tried a bunch. And then when I get really clear water, I'll 4 foot plus. I'll go with like a Pro Blue, something kind of clear and translucent. So maybe like the green gizzard shad. It's kind of more subtle colors when you get really clear water. And then in the winter, throw in a red color, like the Delta Red in the wintertime. Or if I'm fishing on grass, fish the Delta Red. There you go. I try to keep it simple with baits, guys. There's a lot of people that really get flustered about baits, but we just talked for an hour about how the conditions affect bass, and that's going to be have a lot more influence on how you find bass and how you catch bass than if you're throwing the right exact color crankbait, whether you're throwing the Denny Brower Craw, the Delta Red, the Chili Craw, or there's some people who are like, man, that Chili Craw, you have to throw that when the water's 51 degrees, Chili Craw. But when it gets down to 49, that Delta Red really starts working. And then, when you get a foot and 6 inches of water visibility, Gizzard Shad. But then when you get a foot 8 inches of visibility, then that's when you have to switch to the Chartreuse Sexy Shad up here. Yeah, the Chartreuse Sexy Shad. That's the color to throw. But then when you get 2 foot of water visibility, that 2 inches more, that's when you go to the Sexy Shad. And then 2.5 foot of visibility, you got to do the Sexy Green Shad. That's the trick. You got to get all the colors. You got to buy as many lures as possible, because that's how you catch fish. No. If you guys didn't realize I was sarcastic, I'm getting a little bit tired, so I'm getting a little bit snappy at the moment. If you guys are liking my rant. But I get a little bit upset about that, because I think people are just selling you a bunch of crap. That they're like, buy too many baits. You don't need to buy so many baits. There's a lot of baits you have to buy, because there's certain situations, but you really don't need that many baits. If you find the fish, they're gonna bite. If you have, there's a bunch of baits to buy, I guess, but you don't need to have every single color of a striking crankbait. You need like 3 colors of this crankbait. And that's already a lot of baits right there. If you have to have a 5XD, a 6XD, a Series 5, a 10XD, an 8XD, all these different depth crankbaits in 12 different colors, I mean, maybe you guys have the money to do that, or you have the storage room. I can't put all those in my boat. So I go like 2, maybe 3 colors per bait, and that's it. So anyways, let's see here. A couple other things. Do you ever use plastic worms or Guggen baits? If so, what kind and color? Plastic worms, just like a Zoom Old Monster, is awesome. I haven't thrown the Guggen baits. Those guys, they have their market. They're good at capturing their market. I don't know if their baits are any different from any of their baits. They're just more expensive versions of other baits, but they make their money off of marketing. Basically, their baits are the same as every bait on the market, like every bait is. They just upcharge because of marketing, because people will buy it, because that's how marketing works. That's how all of the toilet paper companies and all of the different, CPG companies, consumer packaging companies, that's how they do it. So, I mean, they're doing it the way that big corporations do it. So I can't fault them there, but I'll just go for the cheaper baits myself. The ones that are not as expensive, they work just as well. Let's see here. Anyways, well, I'm trying to keep it 100% with you guys, keep it pretty transparent, keep it honest, because I don't want to feed you a bunch of BS on this channel. I wanted to keep it very, this is what you actually need to know. I get technical and very specific and stuff like that with the areas, where to fish, the conditions, all that stuff. The baits, don't hear me talking about baits too much, because it's just, there's a lot of channels out there for that, but just when you're going out to buy fishing lures, guys, just don't go spend a ton of money on a ton of different colors and different styles. Just focus on a few baits. Figure out how to make those baits work for you first. A 3-car-ounce football head jig, a deep diving crankbait, maybe a swim bait. That's all you're going to need. Maybe a 10-inch worm. But 4 or 5 baits, pick those. These are the baits I'm going to throw. Buy a couple of each of those and figure out how to catch fish on those baits. Buying new fishing lures and trying every single new swim bait that comes on the market. 6 brands of crankbaits. if you're a tour pro and you need to go catch one extra fish over your competition to make a check, yeah, maybe all those different little things make a difference. And if you listen to guys, with the Elite Series pros or the FLW Tour pros, that's their mentality. So for them, all the colors and all the small things make a difference. It puts one extra fish in the boat for them. But like, they're also catching 15, 20 fish a day, and instead of catching 15 fish, they may catch 18 fish, which is a chance for their check. Where some of us are struggling to catch 2 fish a day, and if they could use whatever bait and still catch 10 fish, and it's because they know how to find the areas, and that's the stuff they don't share because that's their secrets. They don't want to basically give up all of their secrets because that's what actually helps them catch fish. All the small lure stuff, they talk about the baits and the colors and all that stuff because 1, they're sponsored, and 2, they don't mind giving it away. They don't care about giving away the information because it doesn't matter to them that much. They're not making a living off of the bait color choices they're making. They're making a living off the stuff I talked about at the beginning of this stream. And so, again, lots of ranting there. I'm getting too tired. I need to stop ranting. I need to get off the stream. Hope you guys are enjoying my commentary on fishing. I need, you guys aren't probably going to see this. It says slow down. I don't know what that means. But anyways, I don't know if I'm talking too fast. But got $20 super chat. Great info. Now get some shirts. Thanks, Butch. Appreciate that for the super chat. And on that $20 super chat, I'm going to end the stream. We hit 1 hour. I did it. Oh, now I'm going to go work on my boat for an hour, charge my camera batteries, and go to bed. So thank you guys for checking out the live stream. I came in hot for this live stream, apparently. I was not expecting... I wasn't expecting the rant. I'm glad you enjoyed the rant, though. Thank you for that last rant. But definitely want to, talk about this stuff, get in the open. It's just my opinion. There's a lot of opinions out there, but that's at least my personal opinion. So thank you guys so much for checking out the live stream. I'll be back next week, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, as always, on Tuesday. Next week, I'm going to probably be doing similar to what I did today, just talking about how I caught my fish, what I was doing. I might do something different. Who knows? I might try something completely off the wall. Who knows? But anyways, thank you guys for checking out the stream. I'll see y'all next week. Have a great night.